You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Our guest today is Linda Palmer. Linda is driven by a passion to understand the human mind. She was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where she specialized in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. She's currently working as a neuroscientist in a research lab at the University of California, Irvine. She recently co-authored a paper detailing a new discovery about memory formation in the brain. Fascinating stuff.
So we have Linda Palmer here with us on the Authenticity Show. Satch, isn't this really exciting?
I am extraordinarily excited. Our very own neuroscientist.
Well, thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Welcome to our show.
So you work at UCI?
I work at UCI.
Okay,
I work in a neuroscience lab.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
what is that like, working in a neuroscience lab, to those of us who have never stepped foot in a neuroscience lab?
You know, it's funny because my background is, my dissertation is actually in philosophy. I don't know if they told you anything about
Yes.
Yeah, Oliver said that you taught philosophy for a while.
Yeah.
Carnegie Mellon, right?
Yeah, for 5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And but I was a graduate student researcher in this lab. And when I was out at Carnegie Mellon, I was still collaborating with them.
Okay.
And then I had a chance to come back and continue
Yeah.
the work. So,
Wow.
So what is it like to work in a lab? You know, it's it's a lot of handling of rats and handling of undergraduates and
Yeah.
designing experiments and running them and
And sometimes the undergraduates bite.
yeah. Well, you know, they're actually mostly pretty good.
Yeah, I'll bet they are.
Yeah,
I bet they are.
I'm not teaching classes anymore.
Okay.
So for me, that's nice to have this interaction with the students.
Yeah. So,
So what do you do actually?
Oh, well, for me personally, I'm an acupuncturist.
Oh, no kidding.
And so I studied Chinese medicine, and then later I went and I studied occupational therapy. So what I do now is I run an occupational therapy assistant program. So I work in education.
What is occupational therapy actually?
OT, it's a rehabilitation profession. So we assess and provide interventions for function, daily function. So let's say somebody has a stroke, and now they need to relearn how to dress themselves and feed themselves, and
okay.
we teach them how to do the things that are important to them that they need to do every day.
Okay.
And I'm also a part-time podcaster.
Apparently.
is the other thing. So
Cool.
yeah. Do you know Carlos's background?
I actually don't think I do.
Yeah, so I'm essentially a life coach. And
No kidding.
Yeah, so it's primarily using hypnotherapy and something called neurolinguistic programming.
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah. That sounds like really fun, interesting work.
It's very rewarding, feels great.
Yeah.
You know, you get to have people walk in feeling one way and then
Right,
walk
yeah.
out
Like, oh
feeling
my God,
completely
what do
different.
I do? And like, well, you
Yeah.
do this, this, and this, and that'll help you do, what do you want, first of all?
Yeah,
I may have to drop you a line later.
absolutely. Yeah, more than welcome.
Yeah,
That all sounds useful.
I sent one of my graduates to see Carlos because she was having tremendous test anxiety and she couldn't pass her national board exam.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
They reworked a few things and she did great.
Oh,
got over
that's
it and
wonderful.
scored very well, in fact.
Yeah.
So, any sort of like mind/emotional difficulty that somebody's having, send them Carlos's way.
It's hacking.
Yeah,
But it's just
yeah,
hacking the
yeah.
mind instead of a computer.
Yeah, we learned so many techniques for dealing with, I don't know,
Yeah.
other things than the mind.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like we go out and run. That'll
Yeah.
help. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
and that's one of the reasons why we are talking with you and why we're interested in asking you a lot about what you do, because what you do relates an awful lot to what Satch does and to what I do in different ways. Wouldn't you say, Satch?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
so many comparisons and connections. Can I just read the title of your
Of course.
scientific paper? Because
Yeah.
this is just awesome. So this is the paper that you wrote. Atypical endocannabinoid signaling initiates a new form of memory-related plasticity at a cortical input to the hippocampus.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a nice long title there.
Yeah.
Not sure what all that means, but that's pretty interesting. What is that about?
Well, so
Why is it important even?
Yeah. So here's the deal. The hippocampus is a piece of the brain that's essential for memory encoding. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have heard of it in the case of this famous patient called HM. the guy so he had intractable epilepsy. This is in the middle of the 20th century, and they went in and they took out his hippocampus on both sides. It cured his epilepsy, but then he was left unable to form any new memories.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a pretty tragic story.
Gee.
So if you look it up, HM, and he lived for decades like this, and so we know that the hippocampus is key to encoding a memory, and it's also a really beautiful structure with with 3 separate layers. It's the trisynaptic circuit. So scientists like to study it because it's so well structured. And the neuroscientist I work with was one of the pioneers in figuring out how memory encoding is happening at the cellular level. So what's happening at the synapses between neurons, where the memory is, they now believe that memory is being encoded at the synapses between neurons, where one neuron is sending a signal to another. If you strengthen that connection, the next time the signal comes down, you get a bigger response. Okay. So the way you strengthen that connection is by changing the shape of the receiving side of the synapse.
Okay.
So it gets a little bit bigger. It essentially changes its shape a little bit. There's more receptors exposed to the neurotransmitter coming from the other side, and then you get. And this happens in seconds. It takes a while to consolidate. So if you get hit on the head, it might jar things up a bit, and it might not consolidate.
Yeah.
But normally it consolidates, and then this will last for decades.
Is this the
Right?
the neuroplasticity?
That's
you're
the
referring to?
neuroplasticity, yeah. Long-term potentiation is what that's called. I don't like the term long-term potentiation, but that's what the field has chosen.
Yeah.
So it's a long-term, meaning it lasts for decades.
Yeah.
And its potentiation means that the synapse has been potentiated in the sense that it now responds more strongly to the input.
Okay.
Okay? So long-term potentiation.
Yeah.
So that story has been figured out over the course of the last 40 years. Cannabinoids have also been shown in other work to depress the release of the transmitters.
Well, and
So they do not strengthen memory normally,
Right.
In most of the places, it hasn't been known to strengthen memory at all. And what we found out, or did you want to ask a question?
yeah, actually,
Okay.
may I pause you just for a moment?
Yeah.
So just so that we're clear for
Yeah.
everyone listening, what is an endocannabinoid?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
What is an endocannabinoid? So a cannabinoid comes from the word cannabis, right?
Which is no longer a dirty word.
Which is no longer a dirty word, right? And what constituents in cannabis do is they attach to receptors that are already present in your brain. So, for example, if you think of opium, right? Opium attaches to opiate receptors that are in the brain. And so cannabis is similar. It sticks to receptors that are already present. And so an endogenous cannabinoid is the substance that the brain produces itself to stick to those receptors. Okay? So you can mess with the system by toking up, right?
Okay.
But it's you're producing cannabinoids all the time, normally.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Now, a question. So endocannabinoids, our inner
Endogenous
cannabis,
cannabinoids,
right?
yeah.
Endogenous cannabinoids. Are they structured a little bit differently than exogenous cannabinoids?
Yeah. So exogenous cannabinoids like THC, they're different molecules, but they hit the same receptor.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yeah. So they're similar, but
They have
shaped a little differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The key side is enough similar that it'll attach to the same receptor,
Right,
but it's not the
right.
same molecule.
Right. Okay.
Theoretically speaking, if you had sufficient endocannabinoids in your own system,
Yeah.
would it produce a marijuana-like high?
That's
Or not?
really interesting because I just came across a popular press discussion of some research that was being done that I'm not familiar with that suggests that the runner's high may be related to that.
Interesting.
And that's all I know.
Well,
so
yeah.
I would need to look into that and find out, okay, is that good research? Is that really what that research said? Or is the
Yeah.
journalist, twisting it a little bit?
Yeah.
But it seems feasible.
Well, I wonder, the phenomenon in hypnosis, which, that's my training, right?
Right.
You can give someone the experience of being high or drunk or really any kind of drug they can imagine while in trance. And it's quite funny because it can last and then you can literally snap your fingers and it's gone.
That's interesting. So there's the subjective experience of but do we know what the neurochemistry of that is?
We
I
don't.
see.
Yeah, they've been trying to figure that out for the last, I don't know, maybe 40 years. They've been trying to figure out what's going on in the brain when someone is hypnotized. And actually, Satch just sent me a recent article about it. And they're figuring out all sorts of little pieces, but they don't have the big picture yet.
I see. There's a lot of parts of the puzzle.
Yeah, and so it's too quick to make any judgments because any of the single answers they've come up with don't really explain a lot of the phenomenon
Right.
of hypnosis.
About hypnosis, that's really interesting because people are super suggestible in it, right?
When you are in a trance, you're more suggestible for sure. But you don't have to be hyper suggestible in order to go into trance. Most everyone will go in and out of trance all throughout the day, and certain conditions, if they're satisfied, will cause you to be more suggestible. Like for example, if you're talking with someone you trust.
Right.
That's an example.
Right.
Or if you're very relaxed, or if you've had a drink or two, or if you are feeling really happy and good about yourself and secure, safe. Those are all feelings that increase receptivity.
So this isn't coming anywhere from any of my professional background, but some of the things you were saying just then, is it possible that kind of state can be something like the state that exists between a parent and a very young child?
Yes. In fact, when learning about hypnosis and also when teaching about hypnosis, one of the things we talk about often is, you're kind of in a state where hypnosis is being used all throughout your childhood. So your parents are your first hypnotists.
I see. Okay, so that's actually is a pretty standard idea in the field. That's really interesting because there's something different about the neurobiology. I'm not a developmental neurobiologist at all, but I know that there are differences in the neurochemistry of kids. They have critical periods.
Yeah, they're learning
for
so
a lot
fast
of things.
at that point, and there's so much brain growth and all that. But also the receptivity to suggestion is very, very high. So one of the things we remind people is rather than framing, obviously some people can frame the idea of suggestibility in a negative way, as though you're.
Well, it depends on what's being suggested.
It's scary, or maybe you're dumb because you're gullible. These are ideas that sometimes people will have.
I see.
And I have to deal with some of those objections or concerns and dance with those concerns when I'm working with somebody. Not everyone believes that.
They're definitely vulnerable, right?
Vulnerable. That's an interesting word. You're not vulnerable if you're with someone trustworthy. No.
Okay, right? Yeah.
But we're always technically vulnerable to something, right?
No, that's true.
You can't avoid. I mean, you have to live in a adamantium bubble or something to not be vulnerable. But
is the hypnotic state typically remembered or not?
Yeah, but that depends on whether the suggestion is of an amnesia.
Oh, I see. That's part of whether or not it's okay.
Yeah, if there's a amnesiac suggestion, then of course you won't remember that. Okay. But then again, that can be wiped away too.
I see.
It's very conditional. It's your imagination. So in certain states, your imagination sticks. In certain states, your imagination is very transient. I'll describe a learning state sometimes as hypnosis because in order to learn, you have to make room. You've got to be receptive. You've got to imagine something very strongly. You've got to take it on. And taking it on is like receiving and accepting a suggestion. So there's really very little to differentiate a true learning state from a hypnotic state. And for the purpose of teaching lessons and things like that, it's really advantageous to sort of say, hey, let's all get into a learning state right now. Can you remember when you were 5 years old and you were having fun learning things and you were just so curious and you start evoking that imagery, you start to become more capable of understanding things because you're not doubting yourself anymore. You're just
not getting in your own way.
Yeah, a little more playful and then it helps you to remember because you're using more of your sensory systems to recall later.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the reason I asked about memory was because under a certain age, children don't remember, right? It's a maturational process, and there is something different about. Well, okay, but normally, you don't have any memories from when you're 1 year old,
right?
Yeah, but you learn a ton, right? You're learning how to speak, right? So it's amazing that how much children that age can acquire, and then it's a really interesting phenomenon that the ability to form episodic memories kind of happens at a certain stage in development, and you kind of wonder, is there a trade-off between being able to absorb so much and become so skillful with it versus now, okay, I'm going to remember actually sort of stories about what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't know, right? This is under, people are trying to figure this out.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know.
finish explaining what was going on with the cannabinoid system?
No.
Because we had to pause and like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Let's talk about
endocannabinoids, like,
that.
what are those? So
Let's go back to that.
These are constituents that, so your brain is producing these endogenous cannabinoids. And it was thought, once they were sort of, first they had to figure out that this was happening. Like, okay, these things are in the brain. And they found that they suppress transmission mostly. So what this paper does is it shows that in one of the inputs to the hippocampus, it's actually plays a role in a new form of long-term potentiation that hasn't been seen before. And it's kind of this crazy Rube Goldberg machine where the synapse change is now happening not on the receiving neuron, but on the synapse from the sending neuron. Wow. And it sends the signal down to the synapse. The transmitter is released. The receiving synapse now, the receiving side of the synapse rather, instead of itself expanding, it literally just creates new cannabinoids, sends those outside the synapse, those travel back to the other side, the transmitting side, cause it to change shape. And now that transmitting side is a little bit modified so that it will release more transmitter next time.
Wow,
and
very interesting.
This had not been observed before.
Wow.
And the interesting thing about that particular pathway is it's believed to play a role in episodic memory. It's the lateral perforant path. The medial perforant path, which really travels right along next to it, but doesn't show this new form of endogenous cannabinoid-dependent memory potentiation, right, is dealing with spatial information. Okay? And the path that endogenous cannabinoids are involved in is dealing with the object information. So what are you looking at? So you have to integrate where things are and also what things are. And this pathway in a rat is carrying a lot of olfactory information because rats are very olfactory.
Right.
In a human being, in your brain and in my brain and our brains, it's carrying a lot of information from associative areas of neocortex.
Okay.
And that's a little bit suggestive when you think about the effects on creativity that exogenous cannabinoids are believed to have. Right? Like what is going on there?
Yeah.
It seems to mess with your sense of time.
Right.
Which might be happening a little bit later in the hippocampus. That stuff, those circuitries are still actually being worked out.
Sure.
But why does it have the psychological effects that it does? And so this looks like this might be one small part of the puzzle is what's going on in this that is enhancing transmission and enhancing memory formation in this one pathway into the hippocampus.
It's interesting. I remember seeing a documentary about marijuana. And in this one experiment, they're doing these various cognitive tests, on poor people coming in to get this cannabis vapor, and one of the things that they found was that obviously it does suppress your ability to solve problems and your typical types of thinking strategies and things. Yet when they had the person brainstorm like loose word associations and things, they were much more creative. So it does inhibit certain things, yet in the language aspect, it actually enhanced their ability to, come up with descriptive words.
To free associate.
There you go. There you go. So it's kind of sounds like a little bit about kind of what we're talking about here.
Beatnik poetry.
There you go.
Yeah. Think about it, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Wow.
Reefer madness.
So, so the you said the that medial pathway was more space.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is the lateral pathway that you're talking about.
That's right.
Okay.
So they're medial and lateral. They're just sort of sitting next to each other in the hippocampus, and so they had to name it something.
Yeah.
So they named it medial and lateral.
I mean, we're getting right down to the fundamentals of existence, space and time, and
pretty much. Yeah.
There you go, right there on the hippocampus.
Yeah.
Now, hippocampus refers to. It looks like a seahorse, right?
That's
like
the idea.
Tail of a seahorse is the idea.
That was the idea.
Okay, very interesting.
I mean, these people are, taking apart the brain. Oh, what do we call this part? Yeah. I think my favorite part is called the substantia innominata.
Wow.
There's a part of the brain which is basically called the unnamed.
The unnamed.
Yes.
Wow. That sounds like, what is it, the Muppet Phenomena? Or is that, what was that song? But no, it was Menomina. That's what it was.
Oh, that's right. That was Animal. Menomino.
Yeah, that's right. do. Great names.
Animal's awesome.
The hippocampus, is that's right next to the amygdala?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got your cortex curling around, and in a human, it's sort of down in the temporal aspect, and it's next to it's very close to the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the brain that I'm particularly interested in.
Me too.
So it's really I think best known for its role in fear. There's the central nucleus, the amygdala. If you have somebody that's scared or frightened, and that thing lights up.
Yeah.
And the central nucleus has been very well studied. There's another nucleus that I'm interested in called the basolateral nucleus. So it's all these things are named by their adjacencies, right?
Yeah.
So it's just sitting right next to the central nucleus. There's the medial, the central, and the lateral and basolateral nuclei. And those guys actually have a different connectivity. The basolateral nucleus has a lot of connectivity with frontal cortex.
Okay.
Yeah, and with associative areas.
Okay.
One of the reasons I'm interested in it is some work that was done by one of the neuroscientists that I work with some years ago, where she showed that rats who are learning a new task, it's a 2-odor discrimination task. And you put a rat in there and all he knows is there's a couple of odors. And so he's like, okay, whatever. And then he eventually realizes by messing around and just trying things out that one of these odors is got a reward associated with it, right? And then once he's figured that out, you can give him paired odors and he'll learn it. He'll learn the quote unquote correct one in one trial. But it takes a while to learn the task because you can't tell him what the task is, right?
Yeah.
So what Dr. Gall did was she looked at the rat's brain during these various stages of learning. So when the animal's just exploring the apparatus, when he's first figured out the task, like this kind of aha moment, right? And then later when he's carrying out this routine that he knows really well of, okay, this is the right one. Which one's right? Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? He can learn it really quickly when he's like well trained. And what she found was that the basolateral nucleus really lit up only at this initial learning moment, at this aha moment.
Really?
Yeah. People study learning in rats a lot and other animals with this rewarded paradigm because it's easy to study. Like, you know when the animal's got it, and usually they'll kind of ignore the training up to it. And then they'll study with the animals when he's learned it, and then can we interfere with that learning by giving him drugs or something?
Yeah.
But what Dr. Gall was interested in was this moment of initial learning. So I'm interested in that state. But the work that I've been trying to extend that by looking at, okay, what about learning without a reward? Right?
Sure.
Because I think most of the learning that people do isn't rewarded immediately, at least.
Yeah.
And people do stuff, people explore, and actually rats will explore and try to figure out what's going on, even if they aren't expecting any reward or any immediate reward.
Yeah.
So we built this kind of complex little arena, and we put a rat in there, and he's got a place he can hide, so he doesn't have to be scared. And they'll come out and check it out, so they'll explore this. And so we've been looking at their exploration patterns. And you find that, once they've learned it, they slow down their exploration rate. That's how you tell they've learned.
Okay.
And we found that this arena that we set up was too complicated for a lab rat to learn very quickly. It took him like 4 days to figure it out with 30-minute sessions. The issue, though, is that lab rats, they live in a box, right? They have food and bedding and water and other rats in this little cage, but there's no spatial complexity in there at all. So they've lived in kind of a relatively impoverished life. What we did was we made an enriched environment for these animals. And after 1 week of enrichment, they learned this new arena in just one session.
Yeah. Wow.
So we were pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I've been doing is looking at their exploration patterns, and what we found was that the enriched rats took the space that they encountered and they broke it up into smaller pieces.
Okay.
That overlapped less, which sounds almost too good to be true. Like they're adopting this kind of divide and conquer strategy. If you look at Descartes' discourse on method, like he recommends this.
Okay.
Take your complex problem and break it down into into simpler parts and solve each of those separately.
Yeah.
This seems to be a really fundamental strategy that at least mammals will adopt once they're faced with complexity. But they need to have some past experience in order to be able to do this. It's a different situation, but they're taking something they've learned in the past and applying it to a new situation. And so my question is, do we see the basolateral amygdala activation in this context? And I don't have the answer to that yet.
They haven't witnessed it, or?
I haven't been able to test the brain activity in that region yet. So I did show that it shows up, the hippocampal pattern did show up. So we're very pleased to see that. But whether or not the basolateral, whether you get this aha signal in this unrewarded situation, I don't know yet.
Okay.
Well,
And that's what I'm really interested in, is do we have this internal signal of internal reward, kind of? It's not really a reward, an internal, to be anthropomorphized, right? It feels that way, right? You figure out a puzzle, it feels good What's going on there? And my hypothesis is that there's a feeling of your mental activity, and when it fits, then you recognize it.
Yeah. Well, we all know that it feels good to figure things out.
Doesn't it?
It feels good to master your enviurement.
Yes.
Okay.
It feels good to go into a new place and I don't know what I'm doing here, and I figured it out today. You know, I survived my first day at my new job, and I feel good because tomorrow I'm not going to be as scared. One of the things that makes a human is we have an innate drive to explore our environment and to master our environment.
Yeah.
And it does have a very real, association with survival.
Yes.
It's really smart to master your environment.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it in terms of mastery, but of course that makes sense.
Yeah.
Exploration, learning, but also it has that angle of like, okay, now I know what's there and I know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Or what I can do with it.
Yeah, which was sort of like when you said that you gave an enriched environment to those rats.
Yeah.
And they mastered it quicker.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Because, that maybe like, this place is awesome. Let's master this and make this cool place our home.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to that.
And
if
it's
I
very
was a rat,
interesting how
I
mean, they're clearly motivated to check things out.
Yeah.
And they seem to enjoy it even, before they've learned it.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be that way in order to go out and explore and learn and be receptive to new things.
Right. Well, it's just so fascinating that there's a part of the amygdala that isn't involved with just fear. Like we learn just through popular articles and whatnot that, about the quote unquote amygdala hijack. Amygdala hijack. Amygdala hijack. Amygdala hijack.
Right.
We talk about that a lot.
Right. It comes up a lot because basically it's something that most people recognize, road rage or intense fear, fight, flight, or freeze, that whole thing.
That's the central amygdala.
Oh, okay,
and those pathways have been pretty well studied, actually.
That's pretty neat.
But yeah, absolutely.
But also the idea of recognizing something, you were mentioning that, and it kind of clicked for me when you said that, because for the purpose of avoiding danger, you would need to have the recognition, and that's partly what malfunctions sometimes when it's in the wrong environment. Like when you interpret, you have generalized anxiety, or you have this amygdala hijack, quote unquote,
right.
That happens because of a situation at work, and it's not a bear attacking you in your camp.
Yeah.
It's just a deadline for something you have to get done.
Yeah.
But you're experiencing this intense fear, and that part of your brain's lighting up because of that, and you get locked into this loop where you're sort of looping back and not accessing your prefrontal cortex and all that good stuff to get control and to have problem solving, and instead you go into this sort of physical response, when the physical response is really not what you need. You need a mental, cerebral, logical, rational response.
That's very interesting because, these brain regions are right next to each other, right? And there's a lot of crosstalk between central amygdala and basolateral and medial. I mean, they're communicating with each other, but it's there are other projections that are different.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Up next, Carlos and Satch continue their conversation with Linda Palmer about neuroscience, the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and Buddhist meditation. Stay tuned.
One of the other neuroscientists that I work with has developed a drug called AMPAkine. And the target of that drug is the receptor system that is the basis of the excitatory transmission in your brain.
Okay.
And so the AMPAkine enhances that excitatory transmission. And what they did was they took rats and they damaged the motor system on one side, like in the striatum, which is controlling movement. And what these rats would then do is they would move in circles, because the dopamine was driving one side but not the other.
Not the other.
Whoa.
Right?
Right.
Okay. So then they took those rats that had this one-sided damage and gave them AMPAkine, and they found that the animals were able to control this circling. And so the hypothesis was that the frontal cortex, now sort of being given a little bit additional charge by this AMPAkine, was able to exert control over the lower brain system that it wasn't quite able to accomplish.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it sounds like what you're talking about is training people to do this sort of voluntarily.
Right.
To
Taking advantage of the neuroplasticity
Yeah.
and retraining. Yeah.
and strengthening their frontal cortical control
Yes.
over these modulatory systems that are
Absolutely.
trying to make them do something else that maybe isn't helping them out.
And it's all the hacks to make that happen, because
Yeah.
you can know that you should do it and you can think about it, but that's
Yeah.
different than actually interrupting the cycle and doing the methods that would cause an actual cognitive shift in your experience, because that's what's marking that out for the person so that they can repeat it.
That's
It creates a
interesting.
pattern, like a new groove or a new
Yeah.
pathway. That's the
That's
idea.
fascinating. Yeah, because knowing that I should or want to do something is really different than knowing how to do it.
It really is. That's
right?
why
And knowing how is a matter of establishing these pathways and strengthening them.
Yeah, which is why often standard psychotherapy isn't as effective at making those types of changes.
I see.
Whereas things like brief therapy, which are more focused on making changes and focused on a result, those methods are more developed for creating a change rather than just
Did you say
understanding.
brief therapy?
Yeah, brief therapy, things like cognitive behavioral therapy,
okay.
hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, EMDR, things like that.
Oh, interesting.
Even EFT to some degree.
Well, one of my favorite ones that I learned from you is just like a simple reframe of like anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
So like if I'm a little out of breath and my heart's pounding, so I'm
Oh, yeah.
scared,
Yeah.
and Carlos basically, gets me to a point where I realize that I wouldn't be scared if I also was out of breath and my heart was pounding because we were jogging.
Right.
Oh my gosh, how
Or
interesting.
having sex with your lover.
Right.
And enjoying it.
Right. And then there you go. You did it again, darn you. Yeah, I love it. Thanks.
I'm not scared. I'm
and then-
excited.
Yeah. And so
it's
then what
funny.
happens is it's
really
almost
exciting.
It's almost like it causes your frontal cortex to go, oh, I have control again. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's just like you're kind of like, oh, that I was interpreting that same sensation this way, and I didn't
Yeah.
realize I had a choice. I
Yeah.
could choose to interpret this other way, and now it doesn't bother me as much as it did.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's
just
amazing how
really
much
fascinating.
ideas can have that kind of power.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
how does that actually work is something we'd like to know.
Just naming something. Sometimes, they've shown that over and over again. Just naming the feeling rather than just feeling like you have an overwhelm. It causes you to go from general to more specific. It gives you a moment of cognitive, like a perception of power over that
I see, yeah.
thing. That reminds me of the old concept in mystical traditions that naming a thing gives you power over it. That's a
That's
very
interesting,
old,
yeah. Oh,
I love
old
that.
concept.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there are all sorts of old stories of Egyptian sorcerers and magicians and having the power to name, and if you could find their secret name, then you would have power over it. Well, that whether that's metaphorical or mystical or whatever, in modern times when we talk about being able to name the thing, it actually gives you a moment of control over it, because you're no longer just in this generalized anxiety. You've got, I have this specific feeling, and it gets a different part of your mind working on it than
Right.
than the part that was experiencing the overwhelm.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So
yeah.
it shifts
Yeah.
things. So just naming it can be useful.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's related to what you were talking about earlier with the children developing their sense of self and the ego,
Yeah.
and how they are then maybe develop the ability to control their emotions a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder about that. It's a fascinating thing, Well, I just think that if I was in the pitch black and I was hearing a sound or feeling something bump against me and I didn't know what it was, I'd be terrified until I realized, oh, that's just my dog.
Right.
So
That's a great analogy.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've been at night at like a hot springs, and or not hot springs. I'm sorry, just like swimming in a lake or something like that.
I was gonna say.
There's really not much living in a hot springs, but
Yeah.
but in a lake or something like that, and when you feel something unexpected, like a fish,
Yeah.
or a piece of seaweed or something, or growth of some kind,
Yeah.
it could be alarming to
Yeah.
you,
Right.
and then you realize,
Right.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's just X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Oh, good. It's not a gigantic squid
Right.
coming up to pull me down.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's funny. Yeah, yeah. I think there is a power in being able to identify, and we know there's a flip side of that too. Sometimes we can take it too far and maybe be attached to a diagnosis, maybe, or like I've seen some clients not know what's wrong with them, and then when they get a diagnosis, they're so relieved and they feel better because they have a diagnosis. Now it's named.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you see the opposite end of that, where somebody's like, well, I can't learn this because of my learning disability or because of my dyslexia.
It becomes a limiting belief.
And then it becomes a limiting belief.
Yeah.
So it could be good or bad. One of my favorite analogies is, a knife in the hand of a thief is different from the knife in the hand of a surgeon, right?
Yeah.
So naming something, or having an idea about what something is, we still need to be wise in which choice we have. Are we going to choose it in a way that's going to help us, or are we going to make the choice that's going to limit us?
Yeah, that's a judgment call every time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, basically all your concepts are trying to help you organize and understand and deal with the world. And they have that dual, I think it's inevitable. Right? They all have that dual nature of, okay, it helps me organize it, I can relate it to other things, but every time I apply a concept, I'm losing the particularity of whatever it is I'm dealing with. Right?
Yeah.
So it's very powerful, but it's also limiting.
So it's about adaptation and flexibility, right? I mean, if you take the analogy of a bicycle or a car, you have different gears that are set up to help you in different ways.
Yeah.
So there are times when, chunking up to a very abstract concept would be really useful. And there's definitely times when being very specific is useful too. Being able to change though and adapt to your environment and the need and all that becomes key.
And to pay attention to, what the details maybe you would have missed.
Yeah.
And are they salient now when maybe they weren't, last time or something? The kind of sensitivity and openness is, but I think it's something that you can cultivate, and it's helpful to be aware of the issue, I think.
Yeah. Being a neuroscientist, how has that affected you, like personally, like in your own mind? Has that affected you? Like, do you think of yourself differently because of your work?
That's interesting because I've been in it so long. It's hard for me to answer that. I mean, I guess sometimes you think about your emotions in terms of, okay, yeah, I know this is a bunch of chemistry.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But, we knew that. It's really fun to go for my bike ride and I'm enjoying it. That doesn't it doesn't make it any less fun or any less beautiful to think of it as a bunch of chemicals happening.
Yeah. The chemistry of love is still very powerful. Yeah.
I mean, it's still real, right?
Right.
At the level of experience.
Yeah.
And I don't think that makes it any less valid.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, if you think about so we don't really have a scientific explanation for consciousness. We just don't. We don't know what it is. We don't really know how it's produced, but we're working on it. Mm-hmm. And some people think we may never be able to do it. Maybe the brain is really too complicated for the brain to understand. That's a possibility. Or maybe it really isn't explainable. I don't think that's true, but there are people who believe it.
Yeah.
And I can't say they're wrong because we don't know yet.
Right.
But if you look back in history, the example of life, like we understand the genetic code, right? We understand how reproduction happens. We understand how life is built out of chemistry and physics in a way that, a couple hundred years ago, we just didn't. And really seemed like it would have been impossible to explain life in terms of these lifeless things. And now we're like, well, no, we see how that works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And so my prediction is that we will one day understand how consciousness is built out of non-conscious things. That's my prediction. I could be wrong. But I don't think that's going to remove any of the magic of it at all, any of the joy or wonderfulness of it, any more than understanding how reproduction works reduces the joy that people take in their children.
Right.
And
or the act itself.
Yeah.
That too, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
You don't stop
Fair enough.
enjoying sex just because you understand that it's all about sperms and eggs and genetics and, it's...
Well, I don't.
Yeah, it's a different matter. So, when you ask the question about, like, as a neuroscientist, does it change how I experience myself? I don't, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, it's good to know.
Sure. Great answer.
And honestly, the main thing that you figure out is, like, there's so much more that we don't understand yet.
What's that ball tossing back and forth look like? How did that happen?
Kind of funny. I actually started out in computer science, and I was interested in artificial intelligence. And in those days, artificial intelligence was this thing called blocks world and schema. It was very logic oriented. And I remember being an undergraduate and taking these classes and being like, I don't think this is right, you know? So what happened was I ended up taking a philosophy class, and I think my last year or last 2 years, and I fell in love with Kant and his theory of how the mind constructs the world. And in particular, the idea that the imagination isn't just something we use to sort of represent what's not there, like, oh, I'm going to imagine, you know, a party balloon or something,
right?
But is actually involved in all of our perception.
Right.
So his claim is that the imagination takes in the sensory material and arranges it in space and in time, and then the understanding puts that under concepts, and that's how you have recognition of what's in the world. So he separated out these two functions, and then the concepts are arranged hierarchically. And that we ourselves are looking for this structure of where things fall into classes, and then those might fall into further classes. And this is something that is sort of built into the mind, that this is what it's looking for in the world. This kind of network idea was something I really liked. So I started to pursue philosophy, and then in my very last year, I took a class called Models of the Brain. And that was a class in computer science, and there was a guy in CS who was collaborating with these neuroscientists. And then I had a problem because I loved both. And I'm deciding what to do in graduate school. And so I ended up getting into graduate school in philosophy. I decided to do philosophy because I wanted to learn how to write. And I turned out I really like writing about arguments. But my idea was that I would do a dissertation on Kant and on neuroscience. And when I ended up doing only a dissertation on Kant, because the Kant guy that I started to work with, who was great, I was very fortunate to work with him, was a guy down at San Diego. He just laughed at me. He said, no, there's no way. And he was right.
You can't.
Actually, I can't do both Kant and neuroscience in one dissertation. So what I did was I wrote my dissertation on Kant, and I worked as a graduate student researcher in the neuroscience lab. So I was able to sort of do both, even though it was quite a long time before I had publications that talked about both. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I was trying to understand the mind, right? And how the mind, I've always been interested in the idea of representation. And how does representation happen? What are the conditions of representation? What does it even mean to represent, right? How is it that one thing stands for another? But that's a very, if you think about it, that's
symbolic.
That's a weird thing. Like, what does it mean to stand for something else? You know, why does this collection of letters mean that word, and why does that word mean that kind of object? What is it that, you know, consciousness is going on in your head that makes you build this world, represent this world? And so those are the kinds of things I was thinking about.
Very interesting. Wow.
You know, when I was 20.
Well, you know, it's very interesting, and this will be a fun story to tell with you here, Linda. I've told you this story, I believe, Carlos. It was when I was doing one of my Vipassana meditation courses, and it was my second course, and I got up about, 5 a.m, and I was in the meditation hall, and it was cold. And I'm just meditating.
Sounds like a great course.
It was great. Yeah, it's great. 10 days of meditation, and so it was my second course. I'm sitting in meditation, and it's early in the morning, and everything got so peacefully still. I was so still. It was just like a stillness that you can't even describe.
Yeah.
And the heater came on in the room. The heater comes on, and for maybe a few seconds, I noticed my brain creating an image of the entire room inside my own mind. And it dawned on me, oh my God, what I think is the room is not real.
Yeah.
My brain created an image of the room.
Oh, yeah.
And I witnessed it for just a few moments.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then, of course, it went away. I lost it as soon as I had it.
Yeah.
But that was a very, very interesting and intriguing experience that I had to see my own brain create an image and then present it to me as though it were real.
Yeah.
And so I knew for a moment that actually wasn't real, but it did represent something that was real.
See, that's
Reflective.
wonderful. And, and if it would be hard to function to actually do anything if you had that stance all the time, right?
Yeah.
So,
you need it. Yeah, you can't sit there and
but
meditation all the time. Yeah.
that's pretty cool, actually. That sounds really Kantian. What you just said.
Yeah,
actually,
well, it reminded me of
right?
your paper. Yeah. So
We're constructing this reality out of the materials we're given.
Yeah. It was very interesting. So I think Kant was right, and a lot of the stuff he said is based upon what I experienced in meditation. Yeah.
Oh, right on then.
So all 3 seconds of it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I don't think you could live there very easily.
No.
But
Yeah.
so the Dalai Lama came to speak to the Society for Neuroscience some
Oh,
years
cool.
ago. Maybe it was I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, and one of the things he was saying was that in his tradition it was he described it as being kind of like a science approach. Like we're trying to
Absolutely.
find out. This is not dogma.
Yes.
This is our hypotheses about how the world works and about how the mind works. And he was telling the audience, like, you guys, should study this. And I think since then, there's been a lot of work done in neuroscience, like people
Yeah.
with fMRIs looking at
Yeah.
meditative states. These are very different approaches, of course, right? But it was really interesting to hear his description of that tradition as being an exploratory one that was posing hypotheses
Right.
and trying to look for answers.
Yeah.
It was different than a sort of Western idea of what a religion consists in.
Yeah. Well, it helped me see my mind create the image of a room.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's something to that.
Yeah.
You might enjoy hearing the Buddhist meditative philosophy of mind and body,
I
which
think
is
so.
very interesting. So what they say is that the mind works like this. You perceive something from the senses, and there is a part of your mind. They don't talk about brain; they talk about mind.
Sure.
Right? There's a part of your mind that perceives that. They have a name for it, sanya. Sanya is to perceive something. There's a part of the mind that can perceive.
Okay.
Then there's another part of your mind that comes just a moment later, which is recognition. So there's perception, then there's recognition,
Yeah.
right? So then you recognize that, I'm perceiving something. Oh, that's an image of a person. Oh, that's a female. Oh, that's that female,
Right.
right?
Right.
Based upon previous learning, another part of the mind creates a pattern of sensations that sort of ripples through your being in
Okay.
response to your recognition.
I see. That actually comes after the recognition.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you perceive, then you recognize, then you create sensation. Then they say that the mind will then sort of reflect that sensation as pleasant or unpleasant.
Okay.
And then based upon whether or not we've decided it's pleasant or unpleasant, will create a reaction, a judgment, a reaction. So you perceive, you recognize, you create a pattern of sensations, you read your own sensations as pleasant or unpleasant, and then you form a reaction.
That's interesting, the separation between the sensation forming and the interpretation of that as pleasant or unpleasant.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also interesting that
Yeah.
that this sensation ripple happens after recognition. That's,
Yeah.
it's a
And until I knew about that, I didn't notice it. But then I started to notice it very clearly
I
when
see.
I was looking for it.
So you
like,
can actually
that is
make this
happening.
conscious.
Yeah, and
These stages in perception.
yeah, I mean they happen extraordinarily rapid.
Right.
Right. So you have the illusion that all of these things are happening at once.
Right.
But through the meditation, they've said, no, things are happening in this order.
Yeah. The normal usual state of consciousness is that it all happens together and you see it as one
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
one thing, right?
And this is the idea behind the concept of misery, right? Is that if I have a pleasant sensation, then I crave that. If I have an unpleasant sensation, then I have an aversion to that.
Right.
And you're stuck either craving or having aversion. And that creates an unsettling experience. And
Yeah.
so the meditation is that you have a third choice, which is observation. And you can retrain that habit pattern of the mind to not react so strongly to craving and aversion.
I see,
right?
yeah.
And so it brings up this idea that the source of your happiness, the source of your misery, is not external objects. It is your reaction to those objects. It's not this thing outside of me. It's how I react to that thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That dictates my happiness or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Linda, at the end of your paper on Kant, you said, finally, two key implications of Kant's account are: we must encourage respect for what is as of yet unformulated, what is not measured, and we must recognize the importance of goalless, unconstrained exploration and play.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So the argument in this paper is that the sort of formulated cognitions that we have, all the things that are sort of fixed and known, came about originally through an unconstrained exploration. They weren't given to us. We had to discover them. And in order to have discovery, you need to be able to look without knowing in advance what you're going to find or deciding in advance what kind of thing you're looking for. If you have this kind of openness, then you can make new connections and you can discover things that maybe you wouldn't have predicted. You need to have this openness so that you can discover really what's out there. So that's one side. And then the other side is that the respect for what's unmeasured. Like before you've discovered the answer, say, to your scientific question, before you've formulated the hypothesis, you have to be sort of messing around and playing with what you haven't formulated yet. Okay? And that means that there's going to be this stage of, I don't know. And we have to allow people to feel comfortable with that in order to be able to move through it and then discover what it is that they don't know. And I think it's the case that, little kids have that. They go out, they explore, they don't know, but they're willing to look around. And it can happen that people grow up and become kind of rigid and forget, like, no, it's okay to not understand. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to not know the answer.
Have they stopped playing?
And to stop playing. Exactly. Play is a good word for it. So I think play and exploration are really closely related. And play is oftentimes a goalless activity, right? You're playing.
And yet you learn so much from play.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you look at the time of life where you're playing the most, it's also the time when you're learning the most.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
And there's in Sweden, I think they've changed a lot of the way they structure free play and the amount of recess that kids get and things
I've
like
heard
that.
about
And
that,
they do way better in their studies because they're
Yeah.
allowing so much play.
Yeah. I think that's the U.S. education system has unfortunately gone in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's
And
topsy-turvy.
I know that, like, for example, talked to some people from in Japan like 20, 30 years ago would admire the American education system because it encouraged creativity in a way that the kind of rote learning that they were, that was the traditional way, didn't. And so I think, I'm hoping we can kind of back off some of the direction we've gone now, like you said, and maybe go more towards what they're doing in the Scandinavian countries. Yeah. And it's encouraging to see this kind of recognition coming out. On the flip side, I want to say also that you need a balance, right? I want to encourage unconstrained exploration and play, but there really is also a place for discipline and like, okay, now this is my goal, and I'm going to work towards it, and I'm going to take these steps. Right? You really want to be able to be flexible and have both kinds of activity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, but play is unstructured, and it's motivated from enjoyment and exploration, and work may incorporate some of those things, but it's always with a goal. It has a purpose, a specific purpose that may benefit you when you get it done. So you need work and play. I mean, if you didn't go, let's say you're providing food for your family, and you need to hunt or you need to gather berries and fruit and things. That's work.
Yeah.
But you also need play. So but without the work, you would need.
Yeah. Right. Well, you guy and gal are talking about occupational therapy's basic foundation, which is that life is a balance of work, rest, and play. Those three things. We could even add leisure. We could say work, rest, play, and leisure. Play and leisure are a little bit different. They're similar.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're similar. Or we could, for leisure, we could maybe say recreation.
I see, because leisure, recreation could be very organized.
Could be very structured.
Right, could be very structured, yeah.
But the word recreation, we may have talked about this, Carlos, is rooted in the idea that recreation means the recreation of the capacity to do labor.
Oh, wow.
So even though you're doing an activity that you have to spend energy to do, it recharges your battery. Yeah. It's like an alternator. It's sort of recharges your battery while you're going. Yeah. You sort of need that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of the problem is that we confuse rest and play as one category. There's work, and then there's everything else. But we have to have work, we have to have rest, and we have to have play. Play is very rejuvenating. And I think play is so important that our genetics are not messing around with it. They mandate it.
Yeah.
So they give us an intrinsic motivation to play because it is so important for our development and our learning. That so we're not screwing around with this one, guys. We're gonna mandate it. It's a genetically, intrinsically motivating thing that you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
But don't you see sometimes that people also confuse play for work in the sense that when they have to win and they're competing and it becomes, an avoidance of being a loser, quote unquote. I don't want to lose. I've got to win. That mindset can create work out of play.
Yes.
Instead of just enjoying getting better at what you're doing,
right?
And you're out there, tossing the ball back and forth, or whatever, you're moving the chess pieces along the board, or whatever it is you're doing, or even competing to write the best poetry for your class or to paint the best picture for your school or whatever. All of that, so you can create. Not that competition is bad. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that there can be a point at which the pressure that you put on it and the goal gets in the way of the fun. And
That's
then
interesting.
you're no longer doing it
totally
out of
agree.
the pure enjoyment of exploring.
Yeah.
And enjoying.
I think, to sort of echo what you're saying, the human nervous system has the ability, always at any time, to enjoy playing for the sake of play.
Yeah.
And we need to remember we have this ability. This is a skill. This is a superpower that we all have.
Yeah.
We can just play for the hell of it. And it is so rewarding to do so. But,
when you're fishing, you're doing it for the halibut, though.
Yeah, for the hell of it. That's right.
It's different.
So, Linda, this was a fascinating conversation, and it was absolutely lovely to have you and to share all your wonderful insights. So, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure.
What a great conversation. Thanks.
Fun talking to you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right, likewise.
Look forward to next time.
Me too.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest, Linda Palmer. The show is produced by Oliver Althoen. Our theme music is composed by Oliver Althoen. Remember to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And check out our website, AuthenTicityShow.com. Thanks for listening and have an authentic day.